I still remember the night she said those words. It was late, the kind of quiet that only small towns have after dark. The street outside my window was empty, the air cool with the smell of pine and rain, and my daughter-in-law, Claire, stood by the doorway with her arms folded, her voice low but sharp. "You're just a guest here. Martha," she said, "maybe it's time you start acting like one." I didn't answer her right away. I just stood there with the cup of tea still warm in my hands, staring at the steam rising like tiny ghosts. I thought I'd misheard her, because how could I, the woman who raised her husband, who built this home brick by brick, be a guest in it? But she meant it. I could see it in her eyes. Not hatred, not anger exactly, but something colder. Distance. That night changed everything for me. It wasn't just about what she said, it was what I finally understood. That love, even the strongest kind, can fade when pride takes its place. I was born and raised right here in Maplewood, a small town tucked between fields and forests. Everyone knows everyone, and the streets still smell of fresh bread from Miller's bakery each morning. When I was younger, I never thought I'd live anywhere else, and I didn't. This house, the white one with blue shutters down on Oak Street, it was my dream. My husband, Thomas, and I bought it the year our son, Daniel, was born. We didn't have much money, but Thomas built most of the furniture himself. The creak in the hallway floor? That was his doing. One stubborn nail that never sat right, and the kitchen table. I still run my hands over the marks Daniel made with his crayons when he was little. It was a simple life, but it was good. Thomas worked at the lumberyard, I taught Sunday school, and Daniel was my whole world. He was the kind of boy who said, "Yes, ma'am," and hugged me every morning before school. When he left for college, I stood by that same doorway and watched his car disappear down the road, my heart torn between pride and fear. I thought he'd always come back, and he did, at first. He'd visit for holidays, bring me flowers, and tell me stories about city life. Then one summer, he brought someone with him. Her name was Claire. I liked her right away, or at least, I wanted to. She was polite, well-spoken, and beautiful in that effortless way city girls often are. She wore neat dresses, always smelled like lilac, and called me Mrs. Parker, even after I told her to call me Martha. She had this way of smiling that felt careful, like she was measuring how much warmth to give. When Daniel told me they were getting married, I hugged them both and smiled, but that night, I cried quietly in my room, not because I wasn't happy for him, I was, but because I knew. Once a son marries, his heart shifts, not away exactly, just elsewhere. After Thomas passed away a few years later, Daniel asked me to move in with them. He said the house would feel more like home if I were there. At first, I resisted. I didn't want to be in the way, but he insisted. So I sold the old place on Oak Street and packed up a lifetime into 3 boxes. One for memories, one for clothes, and one for the little things I couldn't leave behind. Thomas's watch, my wedding ring, and a few photographs. When I moved into their house, I tried to make myself small, quiet. I cooked dinners, folded laundry, and kept the home warm while they worked long hours. For a while it felt right. Claire and I would talk over tea, share recipes, and sometimes laugh about Daniel's messy habits. I thought we were becoming close. But closeness is fragile. It only takes one small crack to let in the cold. It started with little things, the way she'd correct how I seasoned food, the way she'd rearrange the cabinets after I cleaned them, or how she'd sigh, just softly, when I asked too many questions about their work. Then one evening, she told me not to wait up for dinner because they'd already eaten out. It hurt, but I told myself not to take it personally. She's busy, I thought. They're young. They need their space. But space became silence, and silence became distance. There's a moment every mother knows, that quiet ache when you realize your child doesn't need you anymore. It doesn't happen all at once. It's in the little gestures, when he forgets to call you Mom with the same warmth, or when his hugs become one-armed and brief. One night, Daniel came home late, tired and distracted. I had stayed up, waiting with a plate of food. He smiled faintly and said, "Mom, you didn't have to do that." But there was something in his tone, something that told me he wished I hadn't. That was the first night I felt like a visitor. I started spending more time in my room after that. I'd read, knit, or just watch the light move across the floor through the curtains. Sometimes I'd hear them laughing downstairs, their world spinning without me. I'd smile to myself and whisper, "That's how it should be." But deep down, I missed being needed, missed the sound of Daniel calling, "Mom, where's my tie?" Missed the warmth of family dinners where laughter bounced off the walls like music. I never told anyone how lonely I felt. Because mothers, we don't want to burden our children with our sadness. We just carry it quietly, like an old photograph tucked away in a drawer, faded, but never forgotten. Then came that night, the night she said it, the words that broke. Something in me, "You're just a guest here." I don't even remember what started the argument. Maybe it was something small. It usually is. A misplaced dish towel. A comment about dinner. Or maybe the way I reminded Daniel to take his jacket because it was raining. But her voice was cold. And my son said nothing. He just looked down, his silence louder than her words. And that's when I knew. The home I thought I had wasn't mine anymore. That night, I didn't cry. I sat by the window, watching the rain hit the glass, and thought about how strange life can be. You give everything, your love, your years, your patience, and somehow you end up invisible in the place you built with your hands. But even then, I didn't hate her, because love, real love, doesn't vanish. It bends. It breaks, but it never truly disappears. After that night, something in the air changed. You know how silence can have a weight to it? How even when no one says a word, you can feel the tension sitting heavy between you. That's how it was with us. Days passed like clouds, slow and gray. We still said our good mornings and good nights, but they felt like formalities. I'd cook breakfast, leave it covered on the counter, and by the time I came back from my walk, the dishes would already be washed. No note, no thank you. Just done. I kept myself busy, laundry, dishes, tending to the little flower bed by the porch. I'd talk to the marigolds as I watered them, the way you do when the only voice you have left to hear is your own. "Still growing strong," I'd whisper, brushing the petals gently. It was silly, but it gave me comfort. Sometimes, Daniel would join me on the porch after work. He'd sit beside me, phone in hand, scrolling. I'd look at him and wonder when his shoulders had grown so broad, when his laugh had become so different, quieter, more tired. I'd start to ask about his day, but Claire's voice would call from inside, and just like that, he'd be gone again. The house felt larger after that, too many rooms for too few words. I began to notice every creak, every tick of the clock, and in the evenings, when the street lights came on, I'd hear my neighbors, laughter, clinking glasses, families sharing stories. Their voices floated through the windows like echoes of a life I used to have. One afternoon, I decided to bake Daniel's favorite pie, apple, with extra cinnamon. I hadn't made it in years. The smell filled the house, sweet and warm like the old days. When they came home, I smiled and said, "Look what I made for dessert." Claire barely glanced at it. "Oh, I'm trying to cut down on sugar," she said softly, without looking up. Daniel smiled faintly. "It smells great, Mom," he said, but he didn't take a bite either. That night, I ate a small piece by myself. The crust was perfect, just like I used to make for him when he was a boy, but it tasted different somehow. Hollow. The next few weeks blurred together. Claire started working late, and Daniel followed her schedule. Sometimes, they'd come home long after dinner, whispering so I wouldn't hear. Once, I walked into the kitchen and saw her packing containers of food, meals I'd cooked that she hadn't eaten. She froze when she saw me, smiled politely and said, "Oh, I'm just taking this for lunch tomorrow." I nodded, pretending it didn't sting, pretending I didn't. Noticed that she'd scraped my name off the casserole dish I'd written with a marker. Then came Thanksgiving. I'd been looking forward to it, maybe foolishly. I woke up early, made the stuffing, roasted the turkey, even set the table with the good china. I hummed old hymns as I cooked, the ones Thomas used to sing when he carved the bird. By noon, I was checking the clock every few minutes, but the house stayed quiet. Finally, around 2, my phone buzzed, a message from Daniel. "Hey, Mom, sorry. Claire's parents invited us over last minute. We'll see you tonight, okay? Love you." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I turned off the oven. The turkey sat there, golden and untouched. I pulled out a chair and ate alone. One small plate, one fork, one heart that felt a little too heavy. I thought of calling him, just to hear his voice, but I didn't want to sound needy. So instead, I whispered grace and told myself, he's happy. That's all that matters. Around Christmas, things got even quieter. Claire decorated the house beautifully. Silver ornaments, ribbons, white lights instead of the colorful ones I used to hang. It was elegant, modern, but it didn't feel like home. One evening, I found the old tree topper Thomas had made years ago. A little wooden star with our initials carved on it. I held it up, smiling softly. "I thought maybe we could use this," I said. Claire's lips pressed into a polite smile. "Oh, that's lovely. But it doesn't really go with the theme this year," she said gently. Then she turned back to her decorating. I stood there for a moment, the star still in my hand, before setting it quietly on the mantel. That night, I dreamed of Christmases past, Daniel laughing with frosting on his nose, Thomas humming while untangling lights, me wrapping gifts by the fire. When I woke up, the house was silent, the star still untouched where I'd left it. In January, I started keeping a journal. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old notebook with a floral cover. Each night, I'd write a few lines before bed. Daniel seemed tired today. Claire didn't join us for dinner again. I missed the sound of laughter. Writing made it easier somehow, like I was talking to someone who would never interrupt or walk away. One evening, Daniel knocked on my door. He smiled, that same gentle smile that used to melt my heart when he was little. "Mom," he said softly, "Claire thinks maybe you should take a little trip. Visit Aunt Susan for a while. You haven't seen her in ages." I looked up from my journal. "A trip?" I asked. "Now?" He nodded. "Just for a few weeks. Claire's got a big project at work and things have been kind of hectic. I wanted to ask, hectic for who? But I just nodded. "Of course, honey. I'd love to see Susan." He kissed my cheek and said, "You're the best, Mom." But I could see relief flicker in his eyes. That night, I packed my suitcase. Aunt Susan lived 2 towns over, a sweet woman with a sharp tongue and a soft heart. When she opened the door and saw me standing there with my suitcase, she didn't ask why. She just pulled me into a hug and said, "You can stay as long as you need." I stayed for 3 weeks. We spent our mornings on her porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. In the evenings, we'd watch old shows and talk about nothing in particular. It was peaceful, but every night when I lay in bed, I wondered if Daniel missed me. He called once, just once. "Hey, Mom, how are you? Everything okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said. "How's home?" There was a pause. Then he said, "Quiet. Claire's been busy." That was it. The whole call lasted less than 3 minutes. When I hung up, I looked around Susan's guest room, the faded quilt, the family photos that weren't mine, and I felt something I hadn't wanted to admit. Maybe I didn't have a home anymore. When I finally went back, the house looked different, cleaner somehow, like my presence had been erased. My framed photos were gone from the hallway, replaced by abstract art. The crocheted pillows I'd made were packed into a box in the spare room. Claire greeted me with a polite smile. "Oh, welcome back, Martha. Did you have a nice trip?" "I did," I said quietly. Daniel came down the stairs, gave me a quick hug, and said, "We missed you." But his eyes drifted toward Claire as he spoke, as if waiting for her approval. I smiled, pretending not to notice. In the days that followed, I moved through the house like a shadow, cooking, Cleaning, folding, all the motions of a life, but none of the warmth. And sometimes when Claire's friends came over, she'd introduce me like I was an acquaintance. "This is Martha, Daniel's mom." She's staying with us for a while. Staying with us. Not living with us. Not home. Just staying. And that word, simple as it was, settled into my heart like a quiet truth. I wasn't part of their life anymore. I was a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. One evening, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the window. Outside, the neighbor's porch light flickered softly. I thought about Thomas, what he'd say if he saw how things had turned out. He'd probably smile that sad little smile of his and say, "Martha, sometimes love means stepping back." I whispered it out loud, letting the words hang in the air. Stepping back. And in that moment, I knew something had to change, not out of anger, but out of love. Love for my son, and maybe for myself too. That was the night I decided to leave, not forever, but long enough to breathe again, to find peace in my own silence. I didn't tell anyone yet. I just folded my hands, said a quiet prayer, and promised myself that when I did go, I'd do it with forgiveness, not bitterness. It was a Thursday when everything came together. Not a dramatic day, not stormy or loud, just an ordinary evening. The kind of day you don't realize will change you until much later. I remember the way the sunlight stretched across the living room, catching the dust motes in the air. I'd been folding laundry, the same quiet rhythm I'd done all my life. Shirt, pants, towel, repeat. Daniel and Claire had gone to work, and the house was still. As I stacked the clothes neatly, I found one of Daniel's old t-shirts buried under a pile. It was faded now, but I recognized it, the one he wore to his high school baseball games. The fabric was soft, worn thin at the edges. I held it for a long moment, pressing it against my heart, and I don't know why, but that's when the tears finally came. Not loud, heaving sobs, just quiet tears that slipped down without permission, because it hit me all at once. My little boy wasn't mine anymore. He was grown, living his own life, and I was just the echo of a chapter he'd already finished reading. When they came home that evening, I'd already decided, not completely, not out loud, but somewhere deep inside. The choice had been made. Claire came in first, her heels clicking softly on the floor. She smiled politely, the way people do when they're being careful. "Hi, Martha," she said, setting her purse on the counter. "Hi." "Dear," I replied. "Dinner's ready when you are." Daniel followed behind her, loosening his tie. He looked tired, that kind of exhaustion that lives behind the eyes. "Smells good, Mom," he said, giving me a quick pat on the shoulder before heading upstairs. I wanted to tell him how I felt, how I missed hearing about his day, how I missed being part of his life. But the words felt too heavy, too out of place. So instead, I smiled and said, "Thank you, sweetheart." We sat down for dinner a little while later. The clinking of silverware was the only sound in the room. Claire complimented the roast politely. Daniel nodded, distracted by his phone, and then, as if to fill the silence, I asked softly, "So how's work going, Daniel?" He looked up, startled. "Oh, it's fine. Busy," I nodded. "And you, Claire? Everything good at the office?" "Yes," she said, her tone polite but distant. "We're actually planning a short trip next month. A little getaway." "That sounds lovely," I said, smiling faintly. "Where to?" "California," she said. "Just a week?" "We need the break," Daniel added quietly. "We were thinking it might be a good time for you to visit Aunt Susan again, Mom." And just like that, it was decided. No discussion. No question of whether I wanted to go, just an assumption that I would. I looked at Daniel, and for the first time, I saw how far apart we'd drifted. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't unkind, he just didn't see me anymore. I swallowed hard and nodded. "Of course," I said softly. "That sounds like a good idea." Later that night, after they'd gone to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen. The lights were dim, the house quiet. The clock ticked gently. The same clock that used to chime when Daniel was little. When life was filled with bedtime stories and laughter, I reached for a pen and a piece of paper. If I was going to leave, I wanted to do it right. No guilt. No tears, just truth, written with love. I wrote slowly, carefully. My dear Daniel, I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become. You have a good heart, even if life has made it quiet. I see it in the way you look after Claire, the way you still say thank you, even when you're tired. That goodness, it's the best part of you. But I also want you to know that it's okay to let me go. You don't have to carry me out of obligation. I want you to live freely, without feeling watched or burdened. I'll be okay, truly. Maybe it's time I find what home means for me now. Love always. Mom. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into an envelope. Then I set it on the kitchen counter, beside his favorite mug, the one that said, Bin One Son. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The sky was pale blue, streaked with gold. I made a pot of coffee, the smell filling the air like an old memory. Then I packed my small suitcase, just clothes, a few photos, my journal. I took one last look around the house. The walls that had once echoed with laughter now stood silent. But instead of feeling bitter, I felt peaceful, because I knew this wasn't an ending. It was just a change. When Daniel came downstairs, he looked surprised to see me dressed. Mom, he asked, are you going somewhere? I smiled softly. I thought I'd visit Susan a little early. The air will do me good. He frowned, his brows pulling together. You don't have to go yet. We weren't trying to... I held up my hand gently. It's okay, honey. I know. He hesitated, then nodded. Let me at least drive you, he said. The drive was quiet. The morning sun glowed through the windshield, painting everything gold. We passed the fields where he used to play, the diner we'd stopped at after school concerts. Each familiar sight tugged at my heart. But I stayed silent. About halfway there, he finally spoke. Mom, he said softly, I hope you don't feel like we're pushing you away. I looked at him, my son, the little boy who used to hold my hand at the grocery store. His eyes were full of something I recognized. Guilt, confusion, maybe even love. I smiled gently. Daniel, sometimes love changes shape. It doesn't mean it disappears. He glanced at me, his throat tightening. You've always done so much for me. And I always will, I said, just from a different place now. He didn't respond. But when we reached Susan's house, he parked the car and turned to me, eyes glistening. Thanks for understanding. Mom, he whispered. I touched his cheek lightly. There's nothing to forgive, sweetheart. Then I stepped out, suitcase in hand, and walked toward the porch. From the window, I watched as he drove away. For a moment, I almost ran after him, almost called his name like I used to when he was late for dinner. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered softly, Go live your life, my boy. And the wind carried it away like a prayer. That night, I sat with Susan by the fire. She handed me a cup of tea and said, You did the right thing, Martha, did I? I asked quietly. She smiled. Sometimes letting go is the only way to be close again. I looked at the flames flickering in the hearth, thinking about Daniel. For the first time in months, my heart didn't ache. It just rested. I took a deep breath and said, Maybe this is what forgiveness feels like. The next morning, I walked outside to watch the sunrise. The air was cool, the grass damp with dew. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to hold on, to routines, to moments, to people. And for the first time, I realized that love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go with grace. That's when I decided I wasn't going to disappear. I'd still write to Daniel, still send him birthday cards, holiday pies, small notes that simply said, I love you. Maybe one day when he was ready, he'd come visit. And if he didn't, that would be okay too. Because loving him didn't depend on being seen. It was something that lived quietly, steadily within me. The first few weeks at Susan's were quiet. Her house sat on the edge of town. near a field that caught the evening light just right. Every night, we'd sit on the porch with tea in hand, listening to the crickets. It reminded me of home, the kind of peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing. At first, I didn't quite know what to do with myself. I'd spent so long cooking for someone else, folding someone else's clothes, worrying about someone else's needs, that when all that was gone, I felt like I'd lost my purpose. But little by little, life began to fill in the empty spaces. One morning, Susan asked if I'd like to help out at the local library. "They're looking for volunteers," she said, buttering her toast. "Just a few hours a week." I hesitated. "Do they really need someone like me?" She smiled. "They need someone exactly like you, kind, patient, with a good heart." So I went. The library was small, the kind with creaky floors and sun-faded curtains. The librarian, a woman named Carol, greeted me with a hug and a cup of coffee. "Just help folks find what they're looking for," she said. "You'll fit right in." I didn't know it then. But that library would become my new world. Every day, I'd watch the same faces come in, an old man who always borrowed westerns, a little girl who whispered, to the picture books, teenagers, pretending to study but mostly talking about dreams and heartbreak. And I listened, not just with my ears, with my heart. Because after losing something, you learn how to notice people, the quiet ones, the lonely ones. You see yourself in them. Sometimes I'd help someone find a book, and they'd stay just to talk. They'd tell me about their lives, the small heartbreaks, the regrets, the wishes, and I'd nod and smile and say, "Be gentle with yourself. You're doing better than you think." It was strange. I'd gone there to help others, but in truth, it was helping me. A few months passed. Autumn rolled in, painting the trees gold and red. I'd started journaling again, little notes about the people I met, the books I loved, and the moments that made me smile. Sometimes, I'd write about Daniel, not in anger or sadness, just small memories, like how he used to build forts in the living room, or how his laughter could fill a room. Writing about him didn't hurt anymore. It felt like love. Quiet, steady love that didn't ask for anything in return. One afternoon, as I was shelving books, I found a small envelope tucked between two novels. It was addressed to Mrs. Martha. I opened it, expecting maybe a thank you note from one of the patrons, but it wasn't. Inside was a short letter, written in familiar handwriting. "Mom, I've been meaning to call, but every time I try, the words don't come out right. I keep thinking about that morning, how easily I let you go. You didn't make me feel guilty, but I do. Every day." Claire and I had some time to think, and I realize now how much space you made for us, even when we didn't make any for you. I miss you, Mom, I really do. Love, Daniel. I read that letter 3 times. By the third, the tears came again, but these were different. They weren't the kind that came from pain. They were the kind that came from release. That night, I wrote him back. "My dear Daniel, there's nothing to forgive. You were learning how to build your own life. That's what I always wanted for you. I'm proud of you, and I'm proud of the woman you chose. I've found peace here. It's quiet, but it's good. I volunteer at the library, and I bake pies again. The air smells different here, lighter somehow. Don't worry about calling right away. When you're ready, I'll be here, always. Love, Mom." I sealed it and mailed it the next morning, and for the first time, I didn't wait by the phone. I just lived. Winter came gently that year. The snow blanketed everything in stillness, and the world seemed softer. Susan and I spent Christmas together, drinking hot cocoa and laughing about things that didn't matter. The ache inside me had quieted into something almost beautiful, like an old scar that doesn't hurt anymore, but reminds you of how far you've come. In February, the phone finally rang. It was late in the evening. When I picked up, there was a long pause, then a voice I knew by heart. "Hi, Mom." I closed my eyes and smiled. "Hi, sweetheart." He told me about work, about Claire, about how they'd started gardening again. And then, almost shyly, he said, Would you like to come visit? Claire thought maybe next weekend? I felt the warmth bloom inside me, like spring before its time. Yes, I said softly. I'd love that. The following weekend, I stood at their doorstep again, this time with a lighter heart. Claire opened the door, her face nervous at first, but when she saw me, she smiled. Martha, she said gently, I'm so glad you came. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. Daniel came down the stairs, and for a moment, it felt like stepping back in time. Him running to me after school, arms open, laughter in his eyes. He hugged me. Really hugged me. Not out of duty, but from something deeper. I missed you? Mom, he whispered. I held him tight and said, I know. I missed you too. Dinner was warm and easy. Claire asked about the library. Daniel wanted to know about Susan. There was laughter. Soft. Real laughter that filled the air. After dinner, Claire brought out an old photo album. Daniel found this in the attic, she said. Smiling. I flipped through the pages. Baby pictures, holidays, messy family moments. And there it was, a photo of Daniel and me from years ago. Standing in front of his first car, he was grinning wide. I had my arm around him. I ran my fingers over it gently. You always looked so proud, Claire said softly. I still am, I replied. That night, as I lay in the guest room, my old room, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the quiet hum of the house. It wasn't my home anymore, but it didn't need to be. I had a home in my heart now, and that was enough. Before I drifted off to sleep, I whispered into the dark, thank you, God, for giving me back my son in your own time. In the morning, Daniel and I had coffee together on the porch. The sun rose behind the trees, turning the sky pink and gold. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the little boy in his eyes again. Mom, he said, I hope you know how much I love you. I reached over and squeezed his hand. I do, sweetheart. And I hope you know, I never stopped. We sat there for a long while, saying nothing. We didn't need words anymore. The silence between us wasn't distance. It was peace. In the months that followed, I visited often, but I always returned to Susan's afterward, because I'd learned something important. Love doesn't mean staying. It means letting life breathe, giving space for hearts to find their rhythm again. And that, I think, is what forgiveness really is. It's not forgetting the pain. It's thanking it for teaching you how to love without conditions. I still keep Daniel's first letter in my journal, not as a reminder of what I lost, but of what I found. Again, peace, understanding, hope, and whenever I look at it, I whisper to myself, this is love, gentle, patient, and kind. It's been a year since that night. The night Claire told me I was just a guest in my own home. Sometimes it feels like a dream. Other times it still stings a little, not with anger, but with tenderness, like pressing on a healed bruise. I've learned that time doesn't erase pain, it just teaches you how to hold it differently. At first, I held mine tight, afraid to let go, afraid that if I forgave, it would mean what happened didn't matter. But forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's remembering without breaking anymore. My days now are simple. I still help at the library a few times a week. There's a little boy named Tommy who comes in every Wednesday with his grandma. He loves dinosaur books and always says, Miss Martha, do you think dinosaurs had bedtime stories too? I tell him I'm sure they did, about stars and roaring and dreams. When I walk home afterward, I take the long way, past the bakery, the post office, and the church that always smells faintly of lilies. The air feels different now, lighter, as if the whole world exhaled with me when I finally stopped carrying what wasn't mine to carry anymore. Every Sunday, Daniel calls. Sometimes it's a short chat, just checking in, sharing a recipe, telling me about the garden. Sometimes he and Claire both call, and I hear laughter in their voices. It's not the same as before, but it's something honest, grown, mature, full of respect. They learned, and so did I. And you know what? I think that's how families heal. not by pretending everything's perfect, but by trying again in quieter ways. One afternoon last week, a letter arrived. It was from Claire. She wrote, "Dear Martha, I want you to know I've thought a lot about that day. I was overwhelmed, and I said something I can never take back. I see now how much grace you showed me, and how patient you've been with us both. Thank you for loving Daniel, for loving me, even when I didn't make it easy. We'd like you to come stay for a few days next month. No pressure, just come home if you'd like." I sat there, reading it over and over again. The words didn't make me cry this time. They just made me smile. Because forgiveness, once you really let it in, makes room for moments like that. Quiet, tender, full of light. I'll go visit them soon. Not because I'm trying to fix the past, but because I finally feel ready to step into the present. And that's enough. Sometimes, when I sit on my porch in the evening, I think about how strange love can be, how it bends, bruises and sometimes breaks, but somehow, it still finds a way back to you. I used to think being a mother meant never letting go. Now I know it also means knowing when to step back, trusting that the love you planted will grow on its own. There's a photo that sits on my mantel now. It's of me, Daniel, and Claire from last Thanksgiving. We're standing in the kitchen, all smiling, a little awkward, but happy. It's not perfect, but that's the beauty of it. Real love rarely is. Whenever I look at it, I whisper a small prayer. Thank you for bringing us back, not to who we were, but to who we could be. If someone were to ask me what I learned through all of this, I'd tell them this. Sometimes love asks you to stay. Other times, it asks you to step away, not out of bitterness, but out of grace. Because when you stop fighting to be understood, you start finding peace in understanding. And that's what I wish for anyone listening. Peace. Even if your story hasn't healed yet, even if the call hasn't come or the letter hasn't arrived, keep your heart open. Sometimes, love returns in its own quiet way. As for me, I still make coffee every morning. I still write in my journal. And I still keep Daniel's first letter tucked between its pages. It's a reminder that life doesn't always go the way we hope, but it can still end beautifully. If we choose to forgive, and I do, every single day,